My family sat around the long pine table, wearing smiles that felt like a performance. Mother placed a pen before my brother as if crowning him. Announcing good news, I remained silent, knowing they were about to gift a property they did not own. At 9 o'clock, the attorney opened his worn leather briefcase. One single sheet of paper was all it took to leave my parents and brother unable to breathe. My name is Natalie Crow, and I was 33 years old when I realized that the people who raised me did not actually know me at all. I had driven 3 hours north from Chicago to reach Blue Pine County, Wisconsin, following a summons that my mother had vaguely termed a family meeting. The phrase itself felt heavy, loaded with the specific kind of gravity that usually precedes a lecture or a request for money. But as I pulled my sedan onto the gravel driveway of the Aldermere Lake House, the morning sun was fracturing through the canopy of ancient pines, casting long, deceivingly peaceful shadows across the wooden porch. The house was a structure of memory. It was built from cedar and stone, smelling permanently of damp earth, pine resin, and the ghost of wood smoke from winters past. Every creak of the floorboards was a sound I had memorized before I was 10 years old. I walked into the main room, the heart of the house, where the lake was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows that my grandfather had installed 40 years ago. The view was breathtaking, an expanse of steel-gray water that I had spent nearly a decade paying to protect, though nobody in the room acknowledged that fact. My parents were already seated at the long pine table. This table was a beast of a furniture piece, scarred by decades of hot dishes and children's craft projects, but today, it looked different. It looked staged. My mother, Diane, was wearing a silk blouse and her Sunday pearls, an outfit entirely unsuited for a casual Saturday morning breakfast at a rustic lake house. She was arranging napkins with a trembling precision, her eyes darting around the room as if checking for dust motes that might offend a visiting dignitary. My father, Gordon, stood by the window, obsessively polishing his reading glasses with the hem of his flannel shirt. He turned when I entered, his smile tight and practiced. "Natalie," he said, his voice a little too loud for the quiet room. "You made good time." "Traffic was light," I said, setting my bag down. "Why are we all dressed up? Dad? I thought we were just doing pancakes." "It is a special occasion," my mother said, bypassing my question as she gestured for me to sit. "Not at the head, of course, and not on the side facing the lake." She pointed to the chair that faced the wall, the spot where I had sat as a child. "We have to think about the future, Natalie. We have to be responsible." The air in the room was thick, suffocatingly so. It felt less like a family breakfast and more like a deposition. Before I could press them for details, the front door swung open, bringing in a gust of fresh air and the chaotic noise of a young family. My brother, Ethan, walked in first. At 35 years old, Ethan still carried himself with the high school quarterback swagger that had peaked nearly 2 decades ago. He was wearing a polo shirt tucked into khakis, looking like he was ready to pose for a catalog photo. Behind him was his wife, Brielle. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect ponytail, and her eyes scanned the room with a calculator's cold precision. She wasn't looking at the lake. She was looking at the furniture, the walls, the assets. Trailing them were my niece and nephew, 5 and 7 years old, oblivious to the tension. They immediately ran to the corner of the room where a pile of coloring books had been set up. Diving into their own world of crayons and paper, their laughter was the only genuine sound in the room. A sharp contrast to the silence that settled over the adults as Ethan and Brielle took their seats. Ethan sat opposite me, leaning back, claiming the space. He looked at me with a pitying sort of affection, the kind one reserves for a distant relative who has not quite managed to get their life together. "Good to see you." "Nat," Ethan said, reaching for the pitcher of orange juice. "Glad you could make it up. Brielle and I were just saying, the place looks great. Needs a new coat of stain on the deck, though I will have to schedule that for next month." I paused, my hand freezing halfway to my coffee mug. "You will have to schedule that?" Brielle placed a hand on Ethan's forearm, a gesture that looked supportive but was clearly a signal to wait. "We are just thinking ahead," she said, her voice smooth and sugary. "Ethan wants to make sure the property value holds up." My father cleared his throat, the sound distinct and rattling in the quiet room. He put his glasses on, then took them off again. "Well, since we are all here," he began, looking everywhere except at my eyes. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We are not getting any younger. Maintaining 2 properties, the house in the city and this place, it is becoming a burden, not just the money but the energy. We want to settle our affairs while we are still sound of mind," my mother added, clasping her hands together on the table. She looked at Ethan, her eyes softening into pure adoration. "We want to ensure Aldermere stays in the family. We want to honor tradition." I knew what was coming before they said it. I felt the old, familiar wound in my chest rip open, the one that stemmed from a lifetime of being the backup child, the responsible one who was never quite interesting enough to be celebrated. "We have decided," my father said, finally looking at me, his expression steeling itself against any potential protest. "We are going to transfer the deed of the lake house to Ethan." The room went dead silent, save for the scratching of crayons in the corner. "Ethan is the one with the family," my mother explained quickly, as if reciting a rehearsed script. "He has children who need fresh air. He has established roots. He is the man of the family now, and it is traditional for the property to pass to the son who carries the name forward." Ethan tried to look humble, but a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I know it is a big responsibility," he said, puffing out his chest, "but Brielle and I are ready to take it on. We want to keep the legacy alive." "And Natalie," Brielle added, turning her gaze to me, her eyes devoid of warmth, "you are always welcome to visit. We just need a little notice, of course, to make sure it fits our schedule." I sat there, feeling the blood drain from my face, not from shock, but from the sheer audacity of it. They spoke of me as if I were a transient, a drifter. Natalie, the one who is 33 and unmarried. Natalie, the one with the job they do not understand. Natalie, the unanchored. "You are giving him the house," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Because he is stable?" "It is just logic, honey," my mother said, her tone pleading. "You are still figuring things out. You are in the city. You are focused on your career. You do not have the time or the need for a place like this. Ethan has a wife. He has heirs." Heirs. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. They were reducing my value as a human being to my reproductive status and my marital certificate. They saw my independence not as a strength, but as a tragic flaw that needed to be managed. I looked down at the table. That was when I saw it. Right there, next to my father's elbow, was a clear space cleared on the cluttered table. In that space sat a crisp, legal-sized manila folder. On top of the folder was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, the kind you use to sign life-altering documents, and most chilling of all, there was an empty chair set at the end of the table, a fifth-place setting, but no plate, just a coaster and a glass of water. They had not just called me here to discuss this, they had called me here to witness the execution. They had a lawyer coming, they had the papers drawn up. This was not a conversation. It was an ambush. They expected me to cry, to argue, and then ultimately to fold, just as I had done when I was a child. They expected me to accept my displacement because they believed they held the power. I looked at the grandfather clock standing in the hallway. The pendulum swung with a rhythmic, indifferent tick-tock. The hands were aligning perfectly. 9 o'clock. Outside, the crunch of heavy tires on gravel shattered the morning stillness. It was the sound of a luxury sedan, heavy and authoritative, coming to a stop right behind my car. My father looked at his watch and smiled, a look of relief washing over him. "Ah," he said, "that must be Mr. Whitlock. We wanted to make sure everything was done legally and properly today." Ethan straightened his collar, looking like a king awaiting his coronation. Brielle smoothed her skirt. My mother took a sip of water to clear her throat. I remained perfectly still, I did not look out the window. I did not ask who Mr. Whitlock was. I just stared at the manila folder on the table, the one containing a deed they thought belonged to them. You want to talk about stability? I thought, a cold calm settling over me like a layer of ice. You want to talk about who paid for the roof over your heads? You want to talk about ownership? The car door slammed shut outside. Heavy footsteps echoed on the porch stairs. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow, deliberate sip. The bitterness of the dark roast was grounding. I watched them preen and prepare, oblivious to the cliff they were standing on. Let him in. Dad, I said softly, it is time for the paper to speak. The heavy car door slamming outside seemed to act as a starter pistol for my mother. She knew there were only a few minutes before the attorney made his way up the porch steps, and she intended to use every second of that time to rewrite history. She needed to vocalize the narrative she had constructed in her head, perhaps to convince me, but more likely to convince herself that what they were about to do was righteous rather than robbery. You know, my mother started, her voice pitching up an octave into that bright, brittle tone she used when she was nervous. We really could not have kept this place running these last few years without Ethan. He has been a godsend. I watched her hands flutter over the ceramic sugar bowl. Is that right? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Oh, absolutely, she continued, nodding vigorously at my brother. Just last autumn, when those shingles blew off during the storm, Ethan drove all the way up here to handle it. He was on the roof for 2 days straight. And the dock? He is the one who makes sure the pilings are secure every spring. Your father acts like he can still do it, but we all know it is Ethan doing the heavy lifting. I looked at Ethan. He was leaning back in his chair, basking in the praise like a lizard on a warm rock. He took a slow sip of his coffee, offering a humble shrug that was anything but humble. Someone had to do it. Mom, Ethan said, his voice smooth. I am not going to let the place fall apart. It means too much to the family. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. I remembered the roof incident vividly. I remembered it because I was the one who had researched the contractors, vetted their insurance, and wired the $3,000 to my father's account to pay for the materials and labor. Ethan had indeed driven up here. He had stood in the yard drinking craft beer and pointing at the roof, while a man named Mike did the actual work. But in the mythology of the Crow family, writing the check and hiring the expert meant nothing. Standing in the yard and supervising was the heroic act. It is not just the labor, my brother added, glancing at his wife for confirmation. It is the time commitment. Brielle and I spend almost every other weekend here in the summer just keeping the landscaping in check, mowing, trimming the hedges, clearing the beach. It is a second job, honestly. And we are happy to do it, Brielle chimed in, her smile tight. But it is a lot of responsibility. We have practically taken over the management of the estate already. Formalizing it is just logical. It is the next natural step. Exactly, my father agreed, finally turning away from the window now that the lawyer was making his way up the walk. It is about fairness. Ethan has stepped up to the plate. He has shouldered the burden of the physical maintenance. It is only fair that the deed reflects the reality of who is taking care of the property. Then, the conversation pivoted. If Ethan was the hero of this story, there had to be a reason why I was not. The spotlight swung to me, harsh and unflattering. We know this might feel sudden to you. Natalie, my mother said, her expression shifting to one of pitying concern. But we have to be realistic. You are so busy in the city. Your life is, well, it is very up in the air. Up in the air? I repeated. You know what I mean. She sighed. That job of yours, startups and technology, it is all so volatile. You could be out of work tomorrow, and you are renting that apartment downtown, living out of a suitcase half the time. You do not have the stability that Ethan has. I stared at her, fighting the urge to laugh. My company, Northbridge Shieldworks, had closed a contract worth $4 million last quarter. I owned my apartment in Chicago outright, a loft in the West Loop that was worth more than this lake house and my parents' primary residence combined. But to them, because I did not punch a clock at a 9-to-5 corporate office, and because I did not talk about my finances, I was floundering, to them. Silence meant struggle. And let us be honest, my father added, his voice dropping to a murmur as if discussing a shameful medical condition. You are still single, Natalie. You do not have a husband to help you manage a property like this. You do not have children to pass it down to. Aldermere is a family home. It needs a family. There it was, the archaic, unspoken rule of our household laid bare. Value was determined by a wedding ring and a birth certificate. My professional achievements, my independence, my financial literacy, none of it mattered because I had not fulfilled the biological imperative. So, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, because I am unmarried, I am incapable of owning property? Is that the logic? Do not twist our words, Ethan interjected sharply. Nobody is saying you are incapable. We are saying it does not make sense. Why would you want the headache? The taxes alone are killing Mom and Dad. The insurance premiums went up 15% last year. It takes a dual-income household with real stability to absorb those costs. I am doing this to save the family money. I looked down at my hands, studying my fingernails, taxes, insurance, maintenance costs. I thought back to 3 years ago, when the county reassessed the property value and the tax bill jumped by $2,000. My father had panicked, pacing the kitchen, talking about selling the boat. I had transferred $5,000 to his account the next morning, labeling it Happy Anniversary. I thought about the time the septic tank failed in 2019. It was a $10,000 disaster. I paid the company directly over the phone and told them to tell my dad it was covered under a warranty program I had found. He never questioned it. He just wanted the problem gone, and I made it go away. For 7 years. I had been the invisible pillar holding up this roof. I had been the silent partner, the safety net. And now, I was sitting here listening to them explain to me that I was too poor and too irresponsible to manage the very assets I had been subsidizing. We just want you to understand that nothing changes for you, Brielle said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. She reached out and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more like a territorial claim than comfort. You are still part of the family, Natalie. You can come up whenever you want. She paused, then added the caveat that severed the limb entirely. Just give us a heads up a week or two in advance, she said. We are going to start renting it out occasionally to cover costs, and with the kids' soccer schedules, we need to manage the calendar tightly. We cannot just have people popping in unannounced. I am sure you understand. We need to respect everyone's privacy. People, not family, people. I was already being relegated to the status of a guest who needed to apply for a visa to visit the home she grew up in. I looked around the room. Ethan was already mentally measuring the walls. I could see him scanning the vintage oars mounted above the fireplace, probably wondering how much they would fetch on an auction site, or thinking about replacing them with a flat-screen television. He looked at the floorboards, not with affection, but with the possessive eye of a landlord. He sat with his legs spread wide, his arm draped over the back of the chair, expanding to fill the space that he believed was now his by divine right. It is a heavy load, Ethan said, sighing theatrically, but I am willing to carry it for Mom and Dad. You are a good son, my mother whispered, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. A good, responsible son. From the corner of the room, the innocent voice of my 5-year-old nephew cut through the thick atmosphere like a knife through heavy curtains. He looked up from his coloring book, holding a green crayon in his fist. Daddy? He asked. Is this going to be your castle now? The room erupted in a burst of relieved laughter. My mother clapped her hands together in delight. My father chuckled, the tension in his shoulders finally dropping. Ethan grinned, winking at his son. That is right, buddy, Ethan said. King of the castle. I did not laugh. I could not. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest, a physical reaction to the absolute erasure of my existence. They were celebrating a theft. They were laughing over a corpse, and the corpse was me. It is settled then, my father said. Standing up and buttoning his blazer, he looked authoritative, satisfied. "We will sign the papers, transfer the title, and we can all breathe easier knowing the future is secure. This is the right thing to do." He looked at me, expecting validation, expecting me to nod and play my part as the supportive, lesser sibling. "I am glad you all feel so strongly about responsibility," I said quietly. "It is a very important quality." My father opened his mouth to reply, but the sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden porch stopped him. There was a pause, a moment of silence, where the only sound was the wind in the pines and the beating of my own heart. Then, 3 sharp, decisive knocks echoed from the front door. My parents both stood up simultaneously, their movements synchronized by eagerness. They looked like children waiting for Santa Claus. They rushed toward the door, ready to welcome the man carrying the red stamp of destiny, ready to sign away what they believed was theirs to give. I stayed seated. I watched them go. I took another sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth, knowing that in a few minutes, the temperature in this room was going to drop below freezing. They were opening the door to their salvation, but they had no idea they were actually letting in the storm. The man who stepped through the doorframe seemed less like a lawyer and more like a relic of the county itself. Graham Whitlock was a man in his late 60s, though his weathered face suggested he had lived those years twice over. He wore a suit that was clearly expensive, but cut in a style from 20 years ago. A charcoal gray fabric that absorbed the morning light rather than reflecting it. He carried a leather briefcase that was battered and scuffed, the handle worn smooth by decades of gripping the secrets of fractured families. That bag looked heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of every inheritance dispute, every property line feud, and every divorce settlement in Blue Pine County. He did not rush. While my parents vibrated with a frantic, impatient energy, Graham moved with the geological slowness of a glacier. He took off his hat, hung it on the rack by the door, and smoothed his silver hair before turning to face the room. "Good morning, Gordon, Diane," he said, his voice a low rumble that sounded like gravel shifting in a riverbed. "Graham, thank you for coming on such short notice," my father said, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. He extended a hand, which Graham took and shook with a firm, deliberate pump. "It is never a trouble," Graham replied. He turned his gaze to the rest of the table. He nodded politely to Brielle, who offered him a tight, practiced smile, the kind she usually reserved for bank tellers and service staff. He looked at Ethan, who gave a casual 2-finger salute from his forehead, too comfortable in his chair to stand up and show respect to an elder. Then, Graham's eyes found mine. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to stretch. Graham did not smile at me, nor did he offer a wink of conspiracy. He simply held my gaze for 3 seconds longer than was socially necessary. In his pale blue eyes, I saw a profound recognition. It was the look of a man who knew exactly where the landmines were buried, because he was the one who had drawn the map. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a microscopic dipping of his chin, before turning his attention back to the group. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing to the table. My mother immediately fluttered into action, clearing away the remains of the breakfast dishes to make room for the business at hand. "Please, sit here. Graham, would you like coffee or water?" "Water would be fine, Diane," he said, setting his briefcase down on the table. The sound of that briefcase hitting the pine wood was heavy and final. It was a dull thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. Graham sat down, taking the time to adjust his chair, pulling his cuffs, and cleaning his spectacles with a handkerchief he produced from his breast pocket. Every movement was a study in delay. Ethan drummed his fingers on the table. "So," my brother said, his tone bordering on insolent, "let us get the ink on the page. We have a lot of celebrating to do later." Graham paused in his cleaning. He looked at Ethan over the rim of his glasses. "Legal matters require precision. Young man, haste is the enemy of validity." My father laughed nervously. Of course. Ethan is just excited. We all are. It is a big day for the family." "Indeed," Graham said. He put his glasses on and reached for the brass latches of his briefcase. Click, click, the sound was sharp, like a gun being cocked. He lifted the leather flap and began to withdraw a stack of files. The papers were thick, legal-sized, and smelled faintly of dust and toner. "We have prepared the transfer documents," my father said, reaching for the fountain pen he had laid out earlier. "Diane and I are ready to sign over the title. We want to make sure the deed is fully in Ethan's name, effective immediately." Graham did not reach for the pen. Instead, he placed a single hand flat on top of his stack of papers, effectively guarding them. "Before we proceed with any drafting of new deeds," Graham said, his voice steady and devoid of emotion, "I am required by the state bar and by my own ethical standards to verify the current status of the property's ownership. We must establish the chain of title before we can forge a new link." My mother frowned, a line of confusion appearing between her eyebrows. "Chain of title? Graham, you know the history. My father built this house. When he passed 7 years ago, everything went to Gordon and me. It is pretty straightforward." "Yeah," Ethan added, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. "We are the Crows. This is the Crow House. I do not see why we need a history lesson. Let us just sign the papers so I can get to work on the dock repairs." Graham ignored Ethan completely. He kept his eyes fixed on my father. "Gordon, when Arthur passed away, the estate was complicated. There were outstanding debts. There were medical liens." Yes, we know that," my father said, waving his hand dismissively. "But we settled all that. We took care of it." "Did you?" Graham asked. The question hung in the air. Simple but devastating. My father blinked. "Well, of course. I mean, the house is still here, is it not? We are still coming here. The bills are paid." "The bills are paid," Graham repeated. He opened the top file on his stack. "That is accurate. The taxes are current. The insurance is up to date. The mortgage was satisfied 6 years ago." "Exactly," my mother said, smiling again, though it looked strained. "So there is no problem. We own the house, and now we are giving it to Ethan." Graham pulled a document from the folder. It was not a fresh, crisp contract. It was a photocopy of a deed recorded at the county clerk's office, bearing a stamp dated 7 years prior. He held it in his hands but did not turn it over yet. "I went to the county recorder's office yesterday afternoon," Graham said softly. "I wanted to pull the official deed to ensure the lot numbers were correct for the transfer. I found something that contradicts your understanding of the situation." The room went very quiet. Even the children in the corner seemed to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure and stop their coloring. "What do you mean? Contradicts?" Brielle asked, her voice sharp. "What is wrong with the deed?" "There is nothing wrong with the deed," Graham said. "It is perfectly legal. It is binding. But it does not say what you think it says." My father let out a frustrated sigh. "Graham, stop speaking in riddles. If there is a clerical error, we can fix it. Maybe Dad's name is still on it? Is that it? Do we need a death certificate?" "It is not a clerical error," Graham said. "Then what is it?" Ethan demanded, his face flushing a slight pink. "Look, if there is some back taxes or a fee we missed, just tell us. I will write a check right now. I have my checkbook in the car. Whatever it is, $2,000, $5,000, let us just clear it up." I watched Ethan reach for his wallet, the gesture so arrogant, so presumptuous. He thought money, his money, or what he assumed was his capacity to pay, could smooth over any wrinkle in reality. He thought he could buy his way out of a legal fact. Graham looked at Ethan with a mixture of patience and pity. "This is not a matter of fees. Ethan, it is a matter of possession." My mother looked at me, then back at Graham. "I do not understand. We have been coming here for 40 years. We have the keys. We have the memories." "Possession of keys is not possession of title," Graham stated. He lifted the document he had been holding. He smoothed it out on the table, rotating it slowly so that it faced my parents and Ethan. He did not shove it toward them. He simply placed it there. like a doctor placing an X-ray on a light box that reveals a terminal diagnosis. I am afraid there is a significant misunderstanding regarding the estate of Arthur Evans, Graham said. According to the county records, Gordon and Diane Crow have not held the title to this property for 7 years. My father laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. That is ridiculous. If we do not own it, who does? The bank? Did the bank take it and forget to tell us? No, Graham said. Not the bank. Then who? Brielle snapped. Who else is there? Ethan scoffed, shaking his head. This is a joke. Mom, did you put it in a trust or something and forget? Is it in a family trust? No, my mother whispered, her face going pale. We never set up a trust. Then the records are wrong, Ethan declared, slamming his hand onto the table. They made a mistake. I pay the property taxes on this place. Well, I give Dad the money for them sometimes. That proves intent of ownership. Graham looked at my brother, his expression unyielding. Paying a bill does not grant you a deed. Ethan, especially when the money you provided was incidental compared to the actual costs. Incidental? Ethan's voice rose. I have put thousands into this place. And the actual owner has put in hundreds of thousands, Graham said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. My father stared at the lawyer, his mouth slightly open. My mother gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He placed them on his nose and looked down at the paper. The deed is clear, Graham said. The chain of title is unbroken. The transfer was made legally, with full notarization, 7 years ago, to satisfy the debts of the estate and prevent foreclosure. Foreclosure? My mother gasped. We were never in foreclosure. You were days away from it, Graham corrected gently, but the debt was purchased, and the property was sold in a private transaction to satisfy the lien. Sold to who? My father demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Who bought my father's house? Graham did not speak. He simply tapped his index finger on the line of the document where the grantee's name was printed in bold, black letters. All eyes moved to the paper. My father leaned in, squinting. My mother adjusted her glasses. Ethan craned his neck, his face twisted in confusion. I did not look at the paper. I looked at the lake. I watched a heron take flight from the end of the dock, its great wings pushing against the air, rising effortlessly above the water. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and old dust. The room was frozen. The air was stagnant. The clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Then, my father made a sound, a choked, strangled gasp that was halfway between a sob and a cough. He looked up from the paper, his eyes wide, turning slowly, terrifyingly, toward the end of the table where I sat. Graham sat back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. The bomb had been dropped. The explosion was silent, but the shockwave was just beginning to tear through the room. The sole owner of record, Graham said, his voice devoid of theatricality, is Natalie Crow. The deed was transferred and recorded 7 years ago. The name hung in the air, foreign and impossible in this context. It was my name, but spoken in that room, attached to that document. It sounded like an incantation that shattered the world. My mother's hand, which had been hovering near her face, went slack. The linen napkin she had been clutching drifted down to the floor, landing with a soft whisper that felt deafening in the silence. My father did not move. He did not blink. He stood frozen, staring at the paper as if the letters were rearranging themselves before his eyes, trying to force reality back into a shape he understood, but the ink remained black and permanent. Ethan looked at me. His expression was not one of confusion anymore. It was the look of a man who had just been slapped across the face in front of his children. His eyes widened, his jaw worked uselessly, and the arrogance that had coated him like a second skin moments ago began to peel away, revealing raw, naked shock. "That is impossible," my father whispered. the words scraping out of his throat. Natalie? Natalie cannot own this house. She was barely 26 years old. She was 26, Graham corrected gently, and she was the only one with the liquidity and the credit rating to intervene. Brielle was the first to recover her voice, and it was sharp, cutting through the shock like a serrated knife. She did not look at me. She looked at the lawyer, her mind already racing through the implications, calculating the losses. "How is that possible?" she demanded, her voice rising. "If Natalie is the owner, if she has been the owner this whole time, then what are we? What have we been doing here?" She turned to look at Ethan, then at my parents, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "We have been staying here," she said, the realization hitting her. "We have been acting like this is ours, but if she owns it, what are we? Guests? Squatters?" "Technically," Graham said, adjusting his glasses, "you are tenants at will, guests of the owner." "Guests." Ethan spat the word out like it was poison. "I am not a guest in my father's house." "It is not your father's house, Ethan," I said. My voice was calm. It surprised me how steady I sounded, considering my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It has not been Dad's house since the winter Grandpa got sick." Graham nodded, opening the second file. He pulled out a copy of a purchase agreement. The edges yellowed slightly with age. 7 years ago, Graham explained, addressing the room but looking at my father. "Arthur's health was failing. The medical bills were mounting. What you did not know, Gordon, because Arthur did not want you to know, was that he had taken out a second mortgage on this property to cover his treatments. He was proud. He did not want to burden you." My father collapsed into his chair. "A second mortgage?" He never told me. "He was 3 months behind on payments," Graham continued. "The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. The notice was days away from being posted on the front gate. The family was about to lose Aldermere entirely." "And you?" My mother turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes filled with a mixture of betrayal and confusion. "You knew?" "I knew because Grandpa called me," I said. "He called me because he knew I was the only one who wouldn't panic. He knew Dad didn't have the money. He knew Ethan was just starting his business and was leveraged up to his neck. He called me. So I bought it," I continued, keeping my eyes fixed on the centerpiece of the table. "I paid off the arrears. I paid off the remaining principal of the first mortgage. I paid off the second mortgage. I bought the house from Grandpa for the exact amount of his debts so he could walk away clean and live out his last months without shame. We signed a leaseback agreement so he could stay here until the end. And when he died, the title remained with me." Ethan slammed his hand on the table again, but this time it lacked power. It was the flailing of a drowning man. "But I have paid for things," he shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "I paid for the deck repairs. I paid for the new water heater last year. I have put sweat equity into this place for a decade. Natalie, you cannot just sit there and say you own it when I am the one out here every weekend mowing the lawn." He stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I have invested in this property. I have rights." I looked up at him. I looked at the brother who had always been the golden boy, the one who believed his mere presence was a gift to the world. "You managed the repairs, Ethan," I said softly. "You called the contractors. You picked the color of the stain for the deck. That is true." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "But who wired the money to Dad's account every time a bill came due?" I asked. "Who sent the $3,000 for the roof? Who sent the $4,000 for the taxes last year? Who paid the insurance premium last month?" Ethan blinked. "Dad paid those. I gave him $500 for the taxes." $500, Graham repeated. He consulted a spreadsheet in front of him. "The property taxes last year were $4,200. Natalie covered the remaining $3,700. The insurance was $2,800. Natalie paid it in full. The roof repair was $3,100. Natalie wired the exact amount one day before the contractor was paid." Graham looked over his spectacles at my brother. You have contributed, Ethan. We have a record of your contributions over the last 7 years. Your total financial input into this property, including the cost of materials for projects you performed yourself, totals approximately $6,000. Graham paused to let the number sink in. Natalie's contribution, he continued, including the purchase price, the mortgage payoff, the taxes, the insurance, and the major structural repairs, is currently sitting at $412,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. You put in effort, Ethan, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. That is true. You worked hard. But the big money? The money that kept the bank from taking the keys? That was not you. Ethan slowly sank back into his chair. He looked small. For the first time in his life, the narrative of his own greatness had collided with a wall of mathematics, and it had shattered. My mother was weeping now. Soft, confused sobs into her hands. My father looked gray, as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for some sign of a joke, some indication that this was a cruel prank. Why? My father asked, his voice cracking. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think? Why did you let us believe we still owned it? Because you needed to believe it, I said. Because if I had told you I bailed out Grandpa, you would have felt ashamed. If I had told you I owned the house, Ethan would have felt emasculated. You all needed to feel like the owners. You needed to feel like the patriarchs and the matriarchs, so I let you. You let us? My mother's head snapped up. Her tears were suddenly replaced by a flash of anger. The defensive anger of someone who has been caught being foolish. You let us play house? You let us make plans? You sat there this morning and watched us give the house to Ethan, knowing full well we couldn't? I tried to tell you, I said. I tried to tell you at breakfast. I asked if we were sure. I asked if we should check the papers. You didn't want to hear it. You wanted the fantasy. You deceived us, my mother accused, her voice trembling. You lied to your own family. For 7 years. You let us walk around here like we were in charge, while you were, laughing at us? I was never laughing, I said, feeling a stinging heat behind my eyes. I was paying the bills. I was making sure you had a place to come for Christmas. I was making sure Ethan had a place to bring his kids. You tricked me, she whispered, shaking her head. My own daughter, you tricked me. I felt a crack in my composure then. I had been prepared for their anger. I had been prepared for their shock. I had not been prepared for them to twist my salvation into a sin. I never lied, I said, my voice hard. I never once said the words, I do not own this house. I never once said, you own this house. I just remained silent. I looked at my father, then at Ethan, and finally settled my gaze on my mother. I did not lie, Mom, I said. I was never asked in a way where anyone actually wanted to hear the real answer. You saw what you wanted to see. You saw a daughter who was struggling, who was unmoored, who was less than. You never once asked me if I was successful. You never asked me if I could afford to help. You just assumed I couldn't. I gestured to the open folder on the table, to the deed that bore my name. You assumed I was the failure, I said. And because you assumed that, you never looked for the name on the check. Graham closed the folder with a soft snap. The legal reality is not up for debate. Natalie Crow is the sole owner of this estate. Any transfer of ownership to Ethan would require her signature, not yours, Gordon. And frankly, given the tax implications and the value of the gift, I would strongly advise against it even if she were willing. I am not willing, I said. Brielle gasped. It was a small sound, but it signaled the end of her politeness. So that is it? She asked, her voice cold. You are kicking us out? You are taking the house? I am not taking anything, I said, feeling a profound exhaustion settle over me. I am just stopping you from giving away something that was never yours to give. The room felt different now. The warm, nostalgic glow of the morning was gone. The smell of pancakes and pine seemed to have soured. We were no longer a family sitting around a breakfast table. We were debtors and creditors. We were the exposed and the observer. My father took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked defeated, stripped of the authority he had worn so comfortably just an hour ago. "Graham," my father said, his voice weak, Is there any way this is wrong?" "No, Gordon," Graham said kindly but firmly. "I drafted the papers myself 7 years ago. I was Arthur's attorney. I am Natalie's attorney. The house belongs to her." My father nodded slowly. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. And in that moment, I realized that saving the house had cost me something far more expensive than money. It had cost me the comfortable fiction that my family knew who I was. That fiction was dead, lying on the table next to the fountain pen that would never be used. Ethan looked at me across the table, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the financial reality Graham had just laid out. The silence in the room was not the peaceful kind. It was the sharp, static-filled silence that comes before a storm breaks. "This does not add up," Ethan said, his voice tight. He gestured at me with a hand that was shaking slightly. You came up with over $400,000? Natalie, be serious. You drive a 10-year-old Honda with a dent in the passenger door. You wear clothes you buy at outlet malls. You live in an apartment, not a house. Where would you get that kind of capital? Did you get a loan? Are you in debt up to your eyeballs?" My mother nodded, seizing on this lifeline. "That must be it. Oh, honey, did you take out a predatory loan to help Grandpa? Is that why you never talk about work? Because you are drowning in payments?" I looked down at my simple sweater, then back at them. It was almost impressive how deeply their perception of me was rooted in their own biases. To them, my lack of flashiness could only mean a lack of funds. They could not conceive of a world where someone possessed wealth but chose not to wear it. "I do not have a loan," I said calmly, "and the Honda runs perfectly fine, which is why I see no reason to replace it." "Then where?" Ethan demanded. "You work in IT support. Natalie, you fix computers. People who fix computers do not drop $500,000 on a family crisis without blinking." "I do not fix computers, Ethan," I said. "I own the company that secures them." He blinked, his mouth opening slightly. "What?" 7 years ago, around the time Grandpa got sick, I founded a company called Northbridge Shield Works. I said. I kept my voice level, stating facts rather than boasting. "We specialize in encryption and compliance security for healthcare data systems. When the federal regulations on patient data privacy tightened up a few years back, my company was one of the few that had a proprietary solution ready to go." I took a sip of water. "We currently handle data security for 6 major hospital networks in the Midwest. I have 42 full-time employees. We cleared $5 million in revenue last year." The room went dead silent again. My father looked at me as if I had just spoken in tongues. My mother's eyes were wide, darting from my face to my hands, looking for the visible signs of this hidden empire, the diamond rings, the designer watch, the manicured nails, and finding none. "5 million?" my father whispered. The number seemed to physically stagger him. "But you never said anything. You come home for Christmas in that old coat. You let us slip you $100 for gas money when you leave." "I took the gas money because it made you feel good to give it," I said. "It made you feel like you were taking care of me. If I had told you I made more in a month than you made in 2 years, would you have still offered it? Would you have felt like a father, or would you have felt small?" "You deceived us," my mother said, her voice trembling. "You let us worry about you, all these years. I have worried that you were struggling, that you were alone in the city barely making ends meet." "I never told you I was struggling." "Mom," I countered. "You assumed it. You looked at my life. Single, renting, quiet, and you filled in the blanks with struggling. I just didn't correct you because I know how money changes people. I know what happens to families when one person becomes the bank." I looked at Ethan. He was pale, his face drained of color. "I did not want to be the ATM, I said, looking him in the eye. "I did not want every birthday dinner to turn into a pitch for an investment. I did not want our relationship to be about what I could buy for you. I wanted to just be your sister. I wanted to come to the lake and just be Natalie, not Natalie the CEO. So you lied to test us? Brielle cut in. Her voice was icy, sharp enough to draw blood. She was sitting very straight, her protective arm around her son, looking at me with pure venom. You played a game with us for 7 years to see if we were, worthy? It wasn't a test, Brielle, I said wearily. It was a boundary. There is a difference. A boundary? She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You let us pour our hearts into this place. You let my children call this their second home. You let Ethan work his hands raw on that dock, thinking he was building equity for his future. And the whole time, you were sitting there with the deed in your pocket, watching us like we were ants in a farm. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. So, what does this mean for us? Natalie? Are we trespassers? Are my children just guests who have overstayed their welcome? Do we need to ask your permission to use the bathroom? Do not do that, I said, my voice hardening. Do not use the kids as a shield. I have never restricted your access. I have never asked for rent. I have never told you not to come. In fact, I have encouraged it. I wanted Noah and Mila to grow up here just like we did. That has not changed. The only thing that has changed is that you now know who signs the checks. Everything has changed, Ethan shouted. He stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched backward across the wood floor. How can you say nothing has changed? You humiliated me. He paced away from the table, running his hands through his hair, then spun back to face me. You sat there this morning, he said, pointing a finger at my chest. You sat there and listened to Mom and Dad give me the house. You watched me accept it. You watched me thank them. You let me look like an idiot. I tried to stop it, I said. I told you to wait. I told Graham to read the papers. You could have told me years ago, Ethan roared. You could have told me when I was fixing the roof. You could have said, Hey, Ethan, thanks for fixing my house. But you didn't. You let me believe I was saving it. You let me believe I was the one keeping this family legacy alive. Why? Did it make you feel superior? Did you like knowing you were better than me? I didn't tell you because I knew this would happen, I said, gesturing to his red, angry face. I knew that your pride wouldn't be able to handle it, and I was right. My pride? Ethan scoffed. This isn't about pride, it is about trust. It is about pride. Ethan, I said, standing up slowly. I was done being small. You are angry because the story in your head turned out to be fiction. You convinced yourself you were the savior of Aldermere. You convinced yourself that because you are the man, because you have the wife and the kids, you are naturally the one who inherits the kingdom. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at the table, unable to meet my gaze. My mother was weeping silently into a fresh napkin. Look at them, I said to Ethan. Look at Mom and Dad. Why did they assume you were the success story and I was the charity case? Why did they never question where the money for the mortgage payoff came from? Why did they assume Dad miraculously handled it? Because Dad is the provider, Ethan muttered. Exactly, I said. And when Dad couldn't provide, you assumed you were next in line. It never once occurred to any of you that the single daughter in the city could be the one holding the roof up. You believed it because you wanted to believe it. It fit your worldview. The son gets the land. The daughter gets the pity. That is not fair, my mother sobbed. We love you, Natalie. We never pitied you. You just tried to give my house to my brother because you thought I was too unstable to own it, I said. You called it a burden for me, but a legacy for him. If that is not pity mixed with a heavy dose of sexism, I do not know what is. I am not sexist, Ethan spat. I am the one who has been here doing the work. And I am the one who made sure there was a here to work on, I shot back. You fixed the shingles. Ethan, I bought the roof. There is a difference. You played the role of the owner because it made you feel good. I played the role of the owner because the bank required a wire transfer. I looked at Brielle. And as for being guests, yes, in the legal sense, you are, but you are family. Guests don't have keys. You have keys. Guests don't leave their clothes in the closet year-round. You do. I have never treated you like guests. I treated you like family who shared a home. The problem is, you treated me like a guest in my own house." Brielle looked away, her mouth set in a hard line. She knew I was right, and she hated me for it. My father finally looked up. His eyes were red, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger, and it was not love. It was distance. He was looking at me like I was a stranger he had met on a train, someone whose language he did not speak. "You have a company?" he asked, his voice hollow. 40 employees? "Yes, Dad." "And you never told me." "I tried to talk about work a few times," I said, "but your eyes always glazed over. You would ask Ethan about his landscaping business for an hour, and then ask me if I was still doing the computer thing. You didn't want to know. It didn't fit the box you put me in." "I feel like I do not know you," he whispered. "You don't," I said, and the truth of it hurt more than the anger. "You know the version of me that makes you feel comfortable, the Natalie who needs help, the Natalie who is a little bit of a mess, that Natalie makes you feel needed, the real Natalie, the one who pays the bills and runs a corporation. She scares you, because if I don't need you, then you don't know how to be my father." My mother let out a wail, a sharp, wounded sound. "How can you say that? We are a family." "Are we?" I asked. "Because 5 minutes ago, you were ready to sign a legal document that would have stripped me of my property and handed it to Ethan, all while smiling and telling me it was for my own good. That doesn't feel like family to me. That feels like a boardroom coup." Ethan looked at the lawyer, Graham, who had been watching the exchange with a stoic, unreadable expression. "Is there any way around this?" Ethan asked Graham, his voice low. Is it ironclad?" "It is," Graham said. "Natalie owns Aldermere, entirely." Ethan looked at me one last time. The entitlement was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. He didn't see a sister anymore. He saw a landlord. He saw a rival. "Fine," Ethan said. "You own the house. Congratulations, Natalie. You won. You are the big success. I hope it keeps you warm at night." "It does," I said. "The heating bill is $300 a month in the winter. I pay that, too." The silence that followed my revelation was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a world that had just been turned upside down. My mother was weeping, not with the soft tears of sentiment, but with the jagged gasps of humiliation. My father sat like a stone statue, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wood table as if hoping to find a trapdoor that would swallow him whole. Ethan just stared at me, his face a mask of curdled resentment. I sat back in my chair, feeling the adrenaline begin to drain away, leaving behind a deep, aching fatigue. "You want to know why I did not tell you?" I said, my voice quiet but steady. "You think it was malice. You think I was hoarding a secret just to weaponize it. But you have it backward. I did not keep this secret to hurt you. I kept it to save you." I looked out the window at the lake. The water was choppy today, gray waves slapping against the dock. "Go back 7 years," I said. "Go back to the winter Grandpa Arthur got sick. Do you remember that winter?" My mother nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Of course she remembered. It was the winter the furnace died, the winter the snow never seemed to stop, and the winter her father faded away in the back bedroom. I was here every weekend. I reminded them. I drove up from the city on Friday nights. I sat with Grandpa. I sorted his mail. And because I was the one sorting the mail, I was the one who saw the envelopes with the red stripes. I saw the second notice from the bank. I saw the letters from the county regarding the property tax liens. I saw the terrifying stack of medical bills that Medicare was refusing to cover. I looked at my father. "I tried to talk to you. Dad, do you remember? We were standing in the kitchen, right there by the stove. I held up a disconnection notice for the electricity and I said, 'We need to look at the finances. We need to have a real plan because Grandpa is drowning.'" My father flinched. He remembered. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "And do you remember what you told me?" I asked. You took the paper out of my hand. You patted me on the shoulder like I was a child, interrupting a serious conversation. You said, "Do not worry about it. Natalie, your mother and I have it under control. This is grown-up business." Grown-up business. I was 26. I was running a company. But in this house, I was just the daughter who needed to go play outside while the adults talked. "But you did not have it under control," I said gently. "I went to the bank the next day. I spoke to the loan officer. Grandpa had authorized me on his accounts months prior because his eyesight was failing. The officer told me the truth. The foreclosure process had already started. There was an auction date scheduled for 3 months later." I looked at Ethan. "And I knew I could not ask you." I said, "You had just had Noah. You were trying to get your landscaping franchise off the ground. You were eating ramen noodles and pretending everything was fine. But I knew you were maxed out on 3 credit cards. If I had told you the house was being seized, it would have broken you. You would have felt helpless." So I went to Grandpa. It was a Tuesday. I took a day off work. I sat by his bed, and I laid it all out. I showed him the numbers. I showed him the foreclosure date. He was a proud man, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew he was dying, and he knew that if the bank took the house, he would die in a state facility, and the legacy he built for us would be auctioned off to strangers. I paused, remembering the feel of his papery hand in mine. He asked me if Gordon could handle it. I told him no. He asked me if Ethan could handle it. I told him no. Then he looked at me and asked if I could handle it. I wrote a check that day to clear the immediate arrears. 2 weeks later, Graham drafted the sale documents. I bought the house for the exact amount of the debt, plus the remaining mortgage principal. It was not an investment strategy. It was a rescue mission. My mother looked up, her eyes red. "Why didn't you just tell us then? Why didn't you say, 'I bought the house'?" "Because I knew what it would do to this family," I said. I gestured to the room, to the dynamic that had existed for decades. "If I had told you that the unmarried daughter, the one you all secretly worry about, had just bailed out the entire family estate, it would have humiliated Dad. It would have made him feel like he had failed his father, and it would have made Ethan crazy with jealousy. We would have spent the last 7 years fighting a war over who was the real head of the household. So I chose peace. I said, I told Graham to structure the deed so that you and Dad had a lifetime right of usage. I wanted you to feel like this was still your home. I wanted you to walk in here and feel ownership, not obligation. I wanted you to invite your friends over and say, 'This is our lake house,' without looking over your shoulder to see if I approved. I turned to Brielle. And I wanted your children to have this. I wanted Noah and Mila to learn to swim off that dock. I wanted them to catch fireflies in the yard. If I had asserted my ownership, if I had made you feel like guests, you would have stopped coming. Pride would have kept you away. So I stayed quiet. I let you play the host. I let you tell me which bedroom I could sleep in. I let you tell me to clean up my dishes. I took a deep breath. But kindness has a shelf life, doesn't it? Because over time, my silence stopped being a gift and started being a license for you to dismiss me. You stopped seeing my presence as a choice I was making and started seeing it as a charity you were offering. You started talking about me like I was a squatter. You made jokes about how I needed to settle down. You treated me like I was the one who needed saving. I looked at my father again. Do you remember last 4th of July? Dad? We were sitting on the porch, watching the fireworks across the water. Ethan was down at the grill, making burgers. You were drinking a beer. You looked at him, so proud, and you said something to me. My father shook his head slightly, a denial forming on his lips. You said, "It is good to see a man taking charge of the property. A house like this needs a man on the deed to keep it safe. Women are too emotional for land management." The memory of those words still burned like acid in my throat. I was sitting right next to you. I said, I had just wired $8,000 to replace the septic field that Ethan had driven his truck over. I had the receipt in my email inbox on my phone in my pocket, and you sat there and told me that my gender made me incapable of owning the ground I was paying for. I did not say a word. I whispered, I just drank my iced tea and let you have your moment. I let you have your prejudice because I valued your happiness more than my own vindication. But today, I asked, looking around the table, today you tried to take the one thing I actually have. You tried to take my property and give it to the man you think deserves it more, simply because he is a man. Ethan looked away, staring out the window, his jaw working. I did not lie to you, I said firmly. I protected you from the truth. I carried the financial weight of this family on my back for 7 years, and I let you take the credit because I thought love meant protecting people from their own inadequacy. I stood up and walked over to the window. But I was wrong. Love is not about letting people live in a fantasy. Love is about truth. And the truth is, this house is not yours to give, and it is not yours to take. It is mine. And for the first time in 7 years, I am not going to apologize for it. The room remained silent. There were no more arguments about taxes or repairs. The reality of my words had stripped away the defenses. They were finally seeing the past 7 years for what they were. They were seeing the architecture of my sacrifice, and they were realizing that the foundation they had been standing on was me. Graham cleared his throat. The sound was small, but it signaled that the emotional testimony was over and the legal reality was returning. He reached for the next document in his stack. Now that we have established the history, he said, his voice dry and professional, we need to discuss the future, because while Natalie has been generous with her silence, the law requires clarity. My mother looked at me. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked frightened. She looked like a woman who had just realized that the daughter she thought she knew was actually a stranger who held the power of eviction in her hands. I did not want to evict them. I never had. But as I looked at their faces, I knew that the dynamic had shifted permanently. The era of the dutiful daughter was over. The era of the owner had begun. The sound of Ethan's hand striking the pine table was not a thunderclap, but a flat, dead thud that made the silverware jump just enough to rattle against the china. It was the sound of a gavel coming down on a judgment he refused to accept. "This is ridiculous," Ethan spat, pushing himself up from the table so violently that his chair tipped backward and clattered against the wall. He stood there, chest heaving, his face a map of fractured pride. "I am not going to sit here and listen to this. I am not going to sit here and be told that I am a squatter in the house I have spent my entire adult life maintaining." "Ethan, please," my mother started, reaching out a trembling hand toward him, but he recoiled as if she had offered him a handful of burning coals. "No, Mom," he snapped. "Do not tell me to calm down. Do you hear what she is saying? She is saying she owns us. She is saying that every time I came up here, every time I mowed the lawn, every time I fixed a leaky faucet, I was just doing unpaid labor for her investment property. She has been laughing at me for 7 years." "I have never laughed at you," I said, my voice feeling thin and stretched, like wire pulled to its breaking point. "I have appreciated you. There is a difference." "I do not want your appreciation," Ethan shouted. "I wanted respect, and you stole that. You let me walk around here like the man of the house while you held the leash the whole time." He looked around the room, his eyes wild, taking in the beams, the fireplace, the view of the lake, all the things he had mentally claimed as his birthright. "I cannot stay here," he declared, his voice shaking. "I cannot stay in a place where I am a guest. It is humiliating. It is suffocating." Brielle was already moving. She did not scream. She did not argue. She simply went into survival mode. The cold, efficient anger of a mother who feels her territory has been compromised. She stood up and walked briskly to the corner of the room where the children were still frozen, crayons hovering over their coloring books. "Pack up," Brielle said, her voice low and clipped. "Mila, put the crayons in the box. Noah, get your shoes. We are leaving." "Now?" Noah asked, looking up with wide, confused eyes. "But we just got here. I haven't even gone to the water yet. Uncle Ethan said we could go fishing." "Change of plans, sweetie," Brielle said, grabbing the tote bag and starting to shove toys into it with unnecessary force. "Get your shoes, now." But why? Mila whined, sensing the tension radiating off her parents. Is Aunt Natalie mad at us? The question hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I started to stand up. No, Mila, honey, I am not. Do not talk to them, Brielle hissed, spinning around to face me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the polite veneer she usually wore. You have done enough talking for one day. Just let us get out of your house so you can count your money in peace. Brielle, this is not about money, I pleaded. Please, do not drag the kids into this. Let them stay. You can stay. We can work this out. There is nothing to work out, Ethan interrupted, walking over to where his wife was kneeling. He grabbed Noah's jacket and practically shoved the boy's arms into the sleeves. You made your point. Natalie, you are the owner. You are the boss. We get it. My father finally stood up, his movements slow and stiff, like an old man waking from a long, bad dream. Ethan, son, do not leave like this. Let us talk about this. Maybe we can find a compromise. Compromise? Ethan laughed, a bitter, barking sound. What compromise? Dad, the deed is in her name. The lawyer said it. It is done. Unless she signs it over right now, there is no compromise. And she already said she won't. He looked at me, waiting for me to break, waiting for the old Natalie, the people-pleaser, to cave under the pressure and hand him the pen. I stayed silent. I could not give him what he wanted, not because I wanted the house, but because I knew if I gave it to him now, after everything that had been said, our relationship would be built on a lie forever. That is what I thought, Ethan sneered. He picked up his car keys from the counter. The metal jingled brightly, a cheerful sound that felt obscene in the heavy air. Come on, he said to his family. We are going. The children were crying now, soft, confused whimpers that tore at my heart. They didn't understand why the mourning had turned into a funeral. They didn't understand mortgages or liens or pride. They just knew that the adults were scary and the lake was being taken away. Bye, Grandpa. Bye, Grandma. Noah sniffled, waving a small hand as Brielle ushered him toward the door. My mother covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. My father just lifted a hand in a weak wave, unable to speak. Ethan stopped at the door. He turned back one last time, his hand on the doorknob. He looked at me across the expanse of the living room, across the chasm of 7 years of secrets. You think you won, Ethan said, his voice low and venomous. You think because you have the paper, you have the power, but look around you, Natalie. You have all the control. You have all the assets, and I have nothing. I looked at him, standing there with his beautiful wife and his beautiful children, backed by the unconditional heartbreak of our parents. You are wrong, I said, my voice steady despite the tears burning my eyes. You have the one thing you have always had. You have their pride. You have their blind, default approval. You could burn this house to the ground and they would still worry if you burned your hand lighting the match. I gestured to the deed on the table. I have the paper, Ethan, I said. I have the paper because I was never the choice. I have the paper because nobody looked at me and saw a future. You have the family. I just have the roof that protects it. Ethan stared at me for a second, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head, opened the door, and walked out. The door closed with a click. A few seconds later, I heard the heavy thud of car doors slamming. Then the engine roared to life, aggressive and loud, followed by the crunch of gravel as the SUV tore out of the driveway. The silence that rushed back into the room was absolute. It was physically heavy, pressing against my eardrums. The kitchen, usually so full of life and smell and noise, suddenly felt cavernous. The space where Ethan and Brielle had been sitting seemed to vibrate with their absence. Graham sighed. It was a long, weary exhalation. He reached for the files on the table and began to stack them neatly. Well, the lawyer said softly, I suppose that concludes the business for the morning. My father sank back into his chair. He took off his glasses and placed them on the table, rubbing his face with both hands. He looked deflated, a balloon that had lost its helium. He is gone, my father whispered. He is never going to forgive this. He needs time, Gordon, Graham said, snapping the latches of his briefcase shut. He has had a shock. Pride is a difficult thing to mend, but it is not fatal. Graham stood up. He picked up his briefcase and looked at me. His eyes were kind, but sad. I will file the update on the current usage affidavit, Graham said to me. But as for the transfer of title, obviously, there will be no movement on that today. The ownership remains with you, Natalie, as it has been. Thank you, Graham, I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. He nodded to my parents. Diane, Gordon, I am sorry it had to happen this way, but the truth has a way of coming out, one way or another. He walked to the door, took his hat from the rack, and let himself out. Now it was just the three of us, the original unit, before spouses, before grandchildren, before secrets, just me, Mom, and Dad. But we were strangers. My mother stood up slowly. She began to clear the coffee cups, her movements robotic. She picked up Ethan's cup, staring at the ring of coffee left on the wood, then wiped it away with a napkin. "You should have told us," she said. She didn't look at me. She was talking to the cup in her hand. "Mom," I started. "No," she cut me off, turning to face me. Her eyes were dry now, but cold. "You can rationalize it all you want. Natalie, you can talk about saving us and protecting us, but the way you did it, it was cruel." "Cruel?" I asked, incredulity rising in my chest. "Paying off a $400,000 debt so you didn't lose your home is cruel?" "Making me feel like a fool is cruel," she said. "Letting me sit here and brag about my son, knowing the whole time you were the one paying the bills, it makes me feel like you were laughing at me. It makes me feel like you were testing my love for him against my love for you." "I wasn't testing you," I said. I already knew the answer. She flinched, but she didn't deny it. "I feel cheated," she said. "I feel like I have been living in a fake world, and you built it. You controlled it." "I built it so you could live in it," I said. "Well, I do not want to live in it anymore," she said. She put the cup down on the counter with a hard clink. I think we should go home, to the city. I cannot stay here tonight. It doesn't feel like our house anymore." "It is your house, Mom," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "You have a lifetime right of usage. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," she said. "The paper might say I can stay, but the feeling is gone." She walked out of the room toward the bedroom to pack her bag. I looked at my father. He was still staring at the table. "Dad?" I whispered. He looked up. His eyes were wet. "I am proud of you," he said. The words were quiet, almost inaudible. My heart leaped. "You are?" "I am proud that you are successful," he said. "I am proud that you could do what I couldn't, but—" He paused, struggling with the words. "But a father is supposed to provide," he said, "and when he realizes his daughter has been providing for him, it takes something away from him. I know that is my ego. Natalie, I know that, but it hurts. It hurts to know that you looked at me and saw someone who needed saving." He stood up and walked over to me. He didn't hug me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, gave it a squeeze that was more resignation than affection, and then pulled away. "I am going to help your mother pack," he said. I stood alone in the kitchen. I had won. The deed was safe. The house was safe. My financial legacy was secure. I had proven that I was capable, that I was strong, that I was the one who had held the family together when the storm came. But as I looked around the empty room, at the chairs pushed back from the table, at the silence where the children's laughter had been, I realized the cost. I had saved the house, but I had evicted the illusion that kept us together. I picked up the manila folder that Graham had left for me. I held the deed in my hands. It was just a piece of paper. It felt light, insignificant, but it was heavy enough to crush a family. I walked out onto the porch. The wind had picked up, cold and biting off the water. I wrapped my arms around myself. I was the owner of Aldermere. I was the mistress of the estate. I had never felt more homeless in my life. The drive back to Chicago was a blur of gray asphalt and green highway signs, the kind of driving where you cover 60 miles without remembering a single one of them. The silence in my car was usually my sanctuary, a place where I could decompress after a week of managing crisis protocols and high-level encryptions. But today, the silence felt heavy, filled with the echo of the door slamming behind my brother. My phone buzzed in the cup holder near the exit for Milwaukee. I let it sit there for a mile, terrified to look. When I finally pulled over at a rest stop, the engine idling, I picked it up. There were 2 messages. The first was from my father. "I understand what you said about the provider role. I am sorry." It was short, it was succinct. It was the most emotionally articulate thing my father had ever written to me. He did not say he was happy about the situation. He did not say he was proud. He simply acknowledged that my analysis of his ego was correct. That was a start. The second was from my mother. "I need time to process this. I feel like I do not know who you are anymore, but I still love you." I stared at the screen until the backlight dimmed and turned off. "I do not know who you are anymore." That sentence gnawed at me as I merged back onto the interstate. The irony was suffocating. She felt she didn't know me because I had revealed my competence. For 33 years, she had been comfortable with a version of Natalie who was sweet, slightly disorganized, and perpetually in need of guidance, that Natalie was easy to love because she threatened no one, that Natalie made my mother feel needed, the Natalie who owned a corporation and bought estates in cash. She was a stranger. She was intimidating. I thought about the gas money. It was a ritual that happened every time I visited. As I was packing my bag to leave, my father would slide a $20 bill into my palm, folding my fingers over it with a conspiratorial wink. "For the tank," he would say. "Get yourself a coffee." I always took it. I took it when I had $300 in my bank account, and I took it when I had $3 million. I took it because refusing it felt like a rejection of his love. But now, looking back, I realized how much that $20 cost me. It purchased their right to view me as the child. It purchased their right to ask me questions like, "Are you eating enough?" Or "Is that job of yours going to last?" with a tone of benevolent pity. I remembered a dinner 3 years ago. I had just landed the contract with the state hospital system, a deal that would secure my company's future for a decade. I was bursting with pride. I wanted to tell them. I started to say, "I am thinking of expanding operations," and my mother had cut in, placing a hand on my arm. "Oh, honey, do not be too ambitious," she had said, her voice dripping with concern. "You do not want to burn out. A nice, steady job is better for a woman who wants a family someday." I had shut my mouth. I had swallowed the news of my triumph like a bitter pill. As the skyline of Chicago rose in the distance, a thought crystallized in my mind. If I had told them the truth 7 years ago, if I had laid my financial statements on the table, would they have celebrated me, or would they have tried to manage me? I knew the answer. They would have pivoted instantly. If they knew I had money, the conversation would have shifted from poor Natalie to selfish Natalie. They would have asked why I wasn't paying off Ethan's student loans. They would have asked why I wasn't funding their retirement cruises. They would have felt entitled to my success because, in their minds, I was part of the collective, whereas Ethan was the individual heir. I had hidden my wealth not just to protect their pride, but to protect my own autonomy. By the time I reached my office in the West Loop, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the glass desks and server racks. I didn't go home. I couldn't face the empty apartment yet. I needed the sterility of my workspace. I needed the one place where I was defined by my output, not my gender or my birth order. I called my personal legal counsel, Marcus. It was Saturday evening, but he answered on the second ring. "I need to structure a usage trust for the Aldermere property," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Rough weekend?" Marcus asked. He knew the basics of the situation. He was the one who had helped me navigate the tax implications years ago. "The roughest," I admitted, sinking into my leather chair. "The cat is out of the bag. They know everything. Ethan walked out. My parents are devastated." "So you want to sell?" "No," I said firmly. "I will never sell. That house is the only thing left of my grandfather, but I need to formalize the arrangement with my family. I want a document that grants my parents lifetime usage rights, legally binding, so they know I cannot kick them out on a whim. I want them to feel secure. And the brother? I paused, looking at a framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of me and Ethan when we were kids, standing on the dock at Aldermere, holding up a string of sunfish. We looked so happy. We looked like a team. I want to include a clause for him and his children, I said. But it needs to be conditional. No ownership claim, no ability to leverage the property for loans, an absolute adherence to a code of conduct regarding the preservation of the estate. You want to landlord him, Marcus said. I want to protect myself, I corrected. I realized something today. Marcus, Ethan isn't angry because he lost the equity. He barely has 2 nickels to rub together. He wouldn't know what to do with the equity if he had it. He is angry because he lost the role. He was raised to be the Prince of Aldermere. I stripped him of his title. People kill for titles. Natalie, Marcus warned. Be careful. If you offer him a contract that spells out his lack of power, he might take it as a fresh insult. It is the only offer he is going to get, I said. Draft it. I want to keep the control, but I want to share the joy. If he can't handle that distinction, that is on him. We spent the next hour going over the details. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction as we worked. This was my language. Contracts, clauses, contingencies. I could not fix my family with love, because love had been warped by expectations. But I could fix the chaos with law. I could build a structure that would force us to treat each other with respect, even if it was court-ordered. I hung up with Marcus and sat in the darkening office. The cleaning crew was vacuuming in the hallway, the hum of the machine a comforting drone. My phone rang again. I assumed it was Marcus calling back with a question, or maybe my father trying to elaborate on his text. I picked it up without looking at the screen. This is Natalie, I said, my voice professional. Miss Crow? The voice was unfamiliar. It was male, older, with a rasp that suggested a lifetime of cigarettes. It was not Marcus, and it was certainly not anyone in my family. Yes, this is she. Who is calling? You might not know me, the man said. My name is Silas Vane. I used to work as a loan officer at the Tri-County Bank up in Blue Pine. I retired about 4 years ago. I stiffened. Tri-County Bank. That was the bank that had held the original mortgage on Aldermere, the one that was about to foreclose before I swooped in. I remember the bank, I said, my guard going up instantly. Is there an issue with an old account? Everything was settled 7 years ago. Oh, it was settled all right, Silas said. He sounded nervous. I could hear the flick of a lighter in the background. But there is something, well, I heard through the grapevine that there was a bit of a dust-up at the Crow place today. Small towns, you know? News travels fast. I do not see how my family business concerns you. Mr. Vane, I said, reaching for a pen. It concerns me because I was the one who processed your payoff, he said. And I was the one who processed the paperwork your grandfather came in with a week before you showed up. I frowned. What paperwork? My grandfather was bedridden a week before I bought the house. He came in on a good day, Silas said. Or maybe he sent someone. My memory is a little fuzzy on who exactly handed me the envelope, but I remember the document. It was a secondary liability waiver, an addendum to the original deed transfer. I have the deed, I said. There are no addendums. Not in the public record. There aren't, Silas said. This was internal, a private agreement regarding the disbursement of equity in the event of a sale. Your grandfather wanted to make sure that if the house was ever sold, or if the ownership was ever contested, certain parties would be protected. Protected how? I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. It mentioned a payout, Silas said. A specific percentage guaranteed to a family member who had provided substantial non-monetary support. It was unusual language. We didn't file it with the county because the loan was paid off so quickly. And frankly, I thought it was moot once you took the title. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I got a call yesterday, Silas said. From a woman. She wanted to know if we still had the physical archives from 7 years ago. She was asking about that specific addendum. She knew it existed. Ms. Crow. She knew exactly what to ask for. My blood ran cold. A woman? I whispered. Did she give a name? She didn't have to, Silas said. I recognized the voice. It was the same woman who used to call asking about your grandfather's balance back when he was sick, the one who wanted to know how close he was to default. I closed my eyes. A picture was forming in my mind, a picture so ugly I didn't want to look at it. Brielle, I said. Silas didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. I just thought you should know. If that document surfaces, it might complicate your clear title. It might argue that your purchase wasn't a purchase, but a trust holding. It depends on how a judge reads it. Do you have it? I asked. I might have a copy in my basement, Silas said. I kept a few files when I retired, just for insurance. I will pay you for it, I said instantly. Name your price. I do not want money, Silas said. I just do not want to see Arthur's legacy get ripped apart by vultures. He was a good man. He didn't want this. He hung up. I sat there in the silence of my office, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. Brielle. Brielle knew. She had known about the financial trouble 7 years ago. She had been calling the bank. She had been monitoring the default. And she knew about some secret addendum that my grandfather had signed, or had been tricked into signing, right before the end. The anger I had felt earlier that day was a spark. This was a forest fire. They hadn't just been ignorant. They hadn't just been innocent victims of my silence. Someone had been playing a long game. Someone had been waiting for my parents to die or for the title to transfer to Ethan so they could trigger a clause I didn't even know existed. I looked at the legal pad where I had just sketched out a generous, protective trust for my brother and his wife. I ripped the page off the pad, crumbled it into a tight ball, and threw it into the trash can. The strategy meeting was over. The investigation had begun. The Monday morning sun hitting the glass facade of my office building in Chicago felt less like a new beginning and more like an interrogation lamp. I had not slept. The conversation with Silas Vane, the retired loan officer, had been looping in my head for 36 hours, a corrupted file I could not delete. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the hum of servers that secured millions of patient records, but my focus was entirely on a much smaller, dirtier database. I logged into the county clerk's public records portal for Blue Pine County. I had set up a digital tripwire on the Aldermere deed 7 years ago, a simple script that would alert me if any official inquiries or lien requests were filed against the property. It had been silent for years, but when I dug deeper into the pending inquiries log, a layer of data most homeowners never check, I found it. 3 weeks ago, a request for a comparative market analysis had been pulled on the property. A CMA is what you get when you are thinking about selling. It is the first step in turning a home into a pile of cash. The request had not come from me. It had come from a local agency called Lakeside Realty. I picked up my office phone. My hands were cold. I dialed the number for Lakeside Realty. Lakeside Realty, this is Rick, a cheerful voice answered. Hi, Rick, I said, putting on the voice of a confused administrative assistant. I am calling from the title office. We are cleaning up some files. I see a valuation request on the Crow property at 144 Lakeview Drive from earlier this month. The file is missing the contact name. Was that for Gordon Crow? Oh, let me check, Rick said. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Right, here it is. Yeah, that was an inquiry for the Crows. But the contact person wasn't Gordon. It was his daughter-in-law, Brielle. She wanted to know what the listing price would be if they brought it to market in the spring. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Did she ask anything else? Rick laughed, a salesman's chuckle. She was pretty specific. She asked if the parents were on the deed. Could they execute a sale immediately, or if there was a waiting period? She mentioned something about clearing up a family complication. I told her that if Gordon and Diane were the owners, they could sell whenever they wanted. She seemed pretty happy about that. I see, I said. Thank you, Rick. I hung up. It was not just resentment, it was a heist. Brielle had not been fighting for her children's memories. She had been fighting for a payday. She had done the math. She knew that lakefront property values in Wisconsin had skyrocketed since the pandemic. Aldermere was sitting on a lot worth at least $1.2 million. If my parents transferred the deed to Ethan, Brielle intended to flip it. She would have sold my grandfather's legacy, pocketed the $1 million, and probably put my parents in a nice condo somewhere while she and Ethan burned through the rest. I felt a surge of nausea. They were going to sell it. They were going to sell the house I had saved, the house I paid for, and they were going to do it by exploiting the very lie I had told to protect their dignity. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed Ethan. I did not care that he was probably at work. I did not care about his feelings. He answered on the fourth ring. "What do you want, Natalie?" "Did you know she was getting it appraised?" I asked. There was a silence on the other end. It was a heavy, guilty silence. "I do not know what you are talking about," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Do not lie to me, Ethan," I said. "I just got off the phone with the broker. Brielle called Lakeside Realty 3 weeks ago. She asked for a valuation. She asked how fast they could sell if Mom and Dad were on the deed. Did you know?" "We have debts, Natalie," Ethan exploded. The denial vanished, replaced by a desperate, ugly justification. "Okay. Are you happy? The business took a hit last year. We have credit card bills. We have a balloon payment coming due on our own house. We are drowning." "So your plan was to steal my house and sell it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "It wasn't stealing," Ethan shouted. "Mom and Dad were giving it to me. Once it was mine, it was my asset to manage. And yeah, maybe we thought about selling. Why not? It is just a pile of wood. Natalie, it is just a house. It could have set us up for life. It could have paid for the kids' college. But you just have to hoard it. You do not even need the money. And that is what makes me sick. You are sitting on a gold mine just for sentimental reasons while your brother is suffocating." "I am sitting on it because I paid for it," I said. "And because Grandpa Arthur wanted this house to stand for another 100 years, not to be liquidated to pay off your bad business decisions." "Grandpa is dead," Ethan snapped. "And you are dead to me, too." He hung up. I stared at the phone. He had known. He had let Brielle run the inquiry, let her do the dirty work, but he had been waiting with his hands out, ready to catch the coin. But there was still the matter of what Silas Vane had told me, the addendum, the secret weapon Brielle thought she had found. I left my office immediately. I canceled my afternoon meetings. I drove straight to the firm where Graham Whitlock maintained his satellite office in Chicago. I had called ahead, demanding an emergency review of the original purchase files. Graham was waiting for me in a glass-walled conference room. He looked older than he had on Saturday. The stress of the family explosion seemed to have settled in the lines around his eyes. On the table sat a thick, dusty accordion folder. "I pulled everything from the archives, Natalie," Graham said as I sat down. "Every scrap of paper from the transaction 7 years ago." "Silas Vane called me," I said. "He told me there was a side agreement, something Grandpa signed, something Brielle knows about." Graham nodded slowly. "Silas has a good memory. There is a document. It was not part of the official deed recording because it is not a transfer of title. It is a memorandum of understanding. Your grandfather insisted on it at the last minute." "Show me," I said. Graham slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. It was typed on a typewriter. The ink slightly faded. At the bottom, in shaky, blue ballpoint pen, was my grandfather's signature. I read it. "To my granddaughter, Natalie." The document began, "I sell this house to you to save it from the bank. But a house is nothing without the people inside it. By accepting this sale, you agree that the Crow family, specifically my son Gordon and his direct descendants, shall maintain priority usage rights of the property in perpetuity, provided they do not act against the interest of the estate. This home is a sanctuary for the bloodline, and no single member shall deny another member shelter without just cause." I looked up at Graham. Priority usage rights, shelter. This sounds like I cannot kick them out. It is ambiguous, Graham admitted. Legally, it is what we call a precatory wish, a moral obligation rather than a strict legal command, because it conflicts with the absolute ownership of the deed. However, he paused, taking off his glasses. However, Graham continued, if Brielle gets a shark of a lawyer, she could argue that this document creates a constructive trust. She could argue that you purchased the house not as an owner, but as a trustee for the family. And if she can prove that you are violating the terms of that trust, by acting like a tyrant, by denying them shelter, or by causing emotional distress to the beneficiaries, she could petition a judge to force a partition sale. She wants to force me to sell. I realized, if she can't get the deed, she wants to blow up the ownership so a judge orders the asset liquidated and the proceeds split. That is her backup plan. Exactly, Graham said. And she has been laying the groundwork. The call to the broker? That establishes a value. The scene at the house on Saturday? If she spins that right, she can claim you evicted them without cause, violating the spirit of your grandfather's memo. But I didn't evict them, I said. They left. It is her word against yours, Graham said. And right now, your parents are hurt. They are vulnerable. If Brielle goes to them and says, look, Natalie is breaking Grandpa's dying wish. We have to sue to protect our rights. They might sign the affidavit she needs. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. It was a race. Brielle was betting on my parents' emotional fragility. She was betting that their wounded pride would make them pliable. If I let this fester, if I let her whisper in their ears for another week, I would be fighting a lawsuit for the next 5 years. I needed to cut the head off the snake, and I needed to do it before Brielle could get my parents to sign anything. I need to see them, I said. All of them. Ethan, Brielle, Mom, Dad, and you. A family meeting? Graham asked. Natalie, the last one didn't go so well. Not at the lake, I said. The lake is emotional. The lake is where they feel entitled. I want them here, in this office, on neutral ground, surrounded by law books and security cameras. You want to depose your own family? I want to end this, I said. I want to show them the broker's inquiry. I want to show them this memo. And I want to show them exactly what Brielle has been planning. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Set it up for Friday, I said. Tell them it is a settlement conference. Tell them I am ready to discuss the terms of the transfer. That will get Ethan and Brielle in the door. They will think I am capitulating. And when they get here? Graham asked. When they get here, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I am going to show them the difference between a family protector and a family fool. I walked over to the window and looked down at the busy Chicago street. I had spent 7 years playing the role of the quiet, supportive daughter. I had dimmed my own light so my brother could shine. I had swallowed my pride so my father could keep his. But they had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken my generosity for submission. Brielle wanted a fight over the estate? She was about to find out that she wasn't fighting a lonely spinster with a computer job. She was fighting the CEO of a company that hunted threats for a living. Draft the invites, Graham, I said, turning back to him. Make it formal. Make it scary. I want them to walk into this room wondering if they are going to leave in handcuffs. Graham allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. I will have the courier send them out tonight. Good, I said. Friday at 10 o'clock. The reading of the will is over. The trial begins. The conference room at Graham Whitlock's Chicago firm was a stark contrast to the rustic warmth of Aldermere. Here, everything was glass, chrome, and polished mahogany. The air was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, cold enough to make you shiver if you were not wearing a suit jacket. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Graham. On the opposite side sat my parents, looking small and terrified in the uncomfortable designer chairs. Next to them sat Ethan and Brielle. Brielle looked like she was dressed for court. She wore a sharp navy blazer and had a legal pad in front of her. Ethan just looked tired, his eyes bloodshot, staring at the abstract painting on the wall, as if wishing he could dissolve into it. "Let us begin," Graham said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "We are here at the request of Ms. Crow to clarify the standing of the Aldermere estate and to address certain grievances." Brielle leaned forward immediately. She did not wait to be recognized. She had a narrative to sell, and she needed to sell it fast before the facts could catch up. "The grievance is simple," Brielle said, her voice steady but laced with a razor-sharp edge. "Natalie has engaged in a 7-year campaign of manipulation. She allowed my husband, her own brother, to labor under the delusion of ownership. She allowed Gordon and Diane to believe they were passing down a legacy. She has weaponized information to control this family, and she has violated the spirit of Arthur Evans's intentions." She tapped her finger on the table. "We know about the memorandum, Natalie," she said, locking eyes with me. "We know Grandpa signed a document guaranteeing the family shelter and priority usage. By effectively evicting us last Saturday, you violated that trust. We are here to demand a constructive trust be established, ensuring that the ownership is shared equitably among the heirs, not hoarded by the one person who tricked a dying man." My father looked at me, his face pained. "Natalie, is that true? Did you kick them out?" "I never kicked anyone out," I said calmly. "Ethan chose to leave." "I left because I was humiliated," Ethan burst out. "I left because I realized I was just a prop in your little play. You let me fix the roof, Natalie. You let me stain the deck. You let me act like a man while you were laughing at me behind my back." "I was never laughing," I said. "I was paying." "It does not matter," Brielle interrupted. "The point is the memorandum. Grandpa wanted the house to be for the family. You are using it as a power trip. We want our share. Natalie, we want our name on the deed so we can ensure the house is managed fairly." I looked at Graham. He gave a microscopic nod. "You are referring to the Family Protection Clause attached to the original purchase agreement," Graham said. He opened the thick file in front of him. "I have the original right here." "Good," Brielle said, a smug smile touching her lips. "Read it. Read the part where it says family comes first." "I intend to," Graham said. He picked up the yellowed paper with the delicate care of an archivist handling a constitution. "This document," Graham began, "was indeed signed by Arthur Evans. It stipulates that Natalie Crow, as the purchaser, agrees to grant priority usage to Gordon Crow and his direct descendants." My mother let out a breath of relief. "See? He wanted us there." "However," Graham continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming heavier, "there is a second paragraph to this clause. It is a condition of conduct. It is what we call a bad faith provision." Brielle's smile faltered. "What?" Graham adjusted his glasses and read aloud, articulating every syllable. "The rights of usage and priority access granted herein are contingent upon the honest and ethical conduct of the beneficiaries. Should any family member attempt to force a sale, encumber the property with debt, or use deceit to seize control of the title against the owner's wishes, all rights of usage for that individual shall be immediately revoked for a period of no less than 5 years. The room went deadly silent. That is standard boilerplate," Brielle stammered, her face paling. "That doesn't apply here. We are not trying to sell. We are trying to protect the legacy." "Are you?" I asked. I reached into my own folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the printout of the email from Lakeside Realty, along with the call log I had obtained. I slid the paper across the table until it rested directly in front of my father. "Dad," I said softly, "read the highlighted section." My father picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He squinted at the text. "Market analysis request," he read. "Client, Brielle Crow, inquiry regarding immediate liquidation value." He stopped. He looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. "Liquidation? That means selling?" "Keep reading," I said. "Subject asked if the parents, Gordon and Diane, could execute a sale immediately upon transfer of deed without a waiting period." My father read. His voice cracked. "Subject expressed urgency to clear up family complications and cash out." My father dropped the paper. It fluttered to the table like a dead leaf. He turned his head slowly to look at Ethan. "You were going to sell it?" my father whispered. The hurt in his voice was not the sharp pain of an injury, it was the dull, crushing weight of a heart breaking. "We were giving you the house to keep it in the family. We were giving it to you because we thought you honored tradition." "Dad, it is not like that," Ethan started, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "We were just exploring options. The market is high right now. We thought maybe we could sell it and buy something smaller, something easier to manage, and use the rest of the money to help you guys out." "Do not lie to him, Ethan," I said sharply. "You have $60,000 in credit card debt. You have a second mortgage on your own house that you haven't told anyone about. You weren't going to help Mom and Dad. You were going to cash out a $1.2 million asset to save yourself from bankruptcy." My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Ethan, is that true?" Ethan looked down at his lap, his silence confirming everything. "We did it for the family," Brielle screeched, dropping the legal facade entirely. "We are drowning. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to live the way you expect us to live? You want the grandkids to have nice clothes. You want us to host dinners. You want us to look successful so you can brag to your friends. But you never help. You just give the house to the responsible son and expect him to magically pay for it all." "So you decided to steal it," I said. "You pushed Mom and Dad to sign the deed over to you, knowing full well that the moment the ink was dry, you were going to list it. You were going to take the one thing Grandpa left us and turn it into a check." "It is just a house," Brielle shouted. "It is wood and dirt. Why does it matter more than people?" "Because of what it represents," I said. "It represents safety. It represents memory. And you were willing to burn all of that because you couldn't live within your means." I turned to Graham. "Does the evidence of a conspiracy to sell constitute a violation of the bad faith provision?" "It absolutely does," Graham said firmly. "By conspiring to deceive the current owner and the previous beneficiaries, Gordon and Diane, in order to liquidate the asset, Brielle and Ethan Crow have forfeited their usage rights." My father looked at his son. He looked at the man he had spent 35 years championing. He looked at the man he had almost handed the keys to the kingdom. "You lied to me," my father said. His voice was quiet, terrifyingly so. "You sat at that table, ate my food, and let me tell you how proud I was. And the whole time, you were calculating how fast you could sell the roof over my head." "Dad, I am sorry," Ethan choked out, tears finally spilling over. "I was desperate. Brielle said it was the only way." "You are a grown man, Ethan," my father said, sitting up straighter than I had seen him in years. "Do not blame your wife. You were the one who looked me in the eye." My father turned away from Ethan. He looked at me. For the first time in my life, there was no filter of pity in his gaze. There was no, "Poor Natalie." There was only respect. "You knew," my father said to me. "You knew they were in trouble." "I suspected," I said. "But I didn't know they would go this far." "And you stopped it," he said. "You saved the house. Again." "I did?" I took a deep breath. The room felt different now. The power had shifted. Settling squarely on my shoulders, I was not the villain. I was the steward. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. I didn't ask. I dictated. I slid a new document across the table. "This is a revocable trust structure," I explained. "Mom, Dad, this grants you lifetime executive usage. You can go to Aldermere whenever you want. You have your own keys. No one can sell it out from under you. Not me, not Ethan. It is your home until the day you die." My mother reached out and touched the paper, her fingers trembling. "Thank you, Natalie." "As for the children," I continued, looking at Brielle, who was now staring at the table, defeated. "Noah and Mila are innocent. They love the lake. They are welcome at Aldermere anytime, provided they are supervised." "And us?" Ethan asked, his voice a whisper. I looked at my brother. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the relief. The secret was out. He didn't have to pretend to be the rich patriarch anymore. You violated the clause, I said. Technically, I can ban you for 5 years, but I'm not going to do that. I am not going to tear the family apart the way you tried to. I leaned forward. You can come, I said. But you come as guests. You do not touch the maintenance. You do not talk to the brokers. You do not make decisions about the property. You come, you enjoy the lake, and you leave. And if I hear one word about fairness or equity again, the ban goes into effect immediately. Is that clear? Ethan nodded. He couldn't look at me, but he nodded. It is clear. Brielle? I asked. She looked up. Her eyes were hateful, but her posture was broken. She knew she had lost. She knew that if she fought me now, with the evidence of her scheme on the table, my father would never speak to her again. It is clear, she whispered. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Graham will handle the signatures, I said. I have a company to run. I walked around the table. I stopped behind my father's chair and placed a hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered my hand with his own, squeezing it tightly. I am sorry, Natalie, he said. I see you now. I really see you. I know, Dad, I said. I walked to the door. Before I left, I turned back to look at them one last time. The lake house is a legacy of affection, I said, my voice echoing in the glass room. Anyone who tries to turn it into a trophy removes themselves from the family. Remember that. I walked out into the hallway, the sound of my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. I was alone, but for the first time in 33 years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt complete. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your office, your car, or maybe the comfort of your own home? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.